Hello and welcome to the Start Here podcast for web development. My name is Dane Miller, and we're here to teach you how to build a career in web dev. You can find us online at starthere.fm. Hey guys, and welcome to episode 26 of the Start Here web development podcast. On this podcast, we're going to be talking to Josh Duty. Josh Duty is an author and consultant. He's a negotiation expert, and he's doubled his salary in 3 years. How many of you guys would want to do that? He took everything that he learned from helping others and wrote the Fearless Salary Negotiation book. It's a #1 bestseller on Amazon, and you guys are really going to value the content that he has today. Welcome, Josh. Nice to have you.
Hey, Dane. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So today I wanted to walk through the process it takes to finish your skill acquisition in web development into getting that best job and that best job offer for you. Now, this is obviously a very individual thing. People will want to work at different types of companies. Some people will want to work in government. Some people listening to this podcast will want to work for themselves as freelancers. Others will want to work at startups and big corporations. And the way that you approach all of those is a little bit different, but underneath all of that, there's a fundamental framework in how you approach your job search and then your job negotiation, your job offer, the interview process itself. And today, that's what we're going to cover, guys. We're going to talk to Josh here about all of the different steps that it takes to go from finishing your learning into getting that best job offer. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to evaluate what type of company it is that you want to work for. And this isn't something that we can exactly help you with because it's a very personal decision. Like I said, there's tons of different choices. There's a bunch of different industries that interface with technology, obviously. But once you've done that, it really comes down to your resume, how you tailor your resume to the specific job that you're approaching, and then from there, the different interview skills that you have. So let's start at resume. Josh, so if I'm somebody who's just approaching a company, let's say it's not a huge corporation, it's a medium-sized company, maybe 10 to 50 people in the technology industry, perhaps a startup. What is the best way that I can approach them with my resume, perhaps my LinkedIn, and how could I tailor it to guarantee or at least increase the odds that I'll get a phone call?
I think there's a lot to unpack there. One of the first things I should say is that I think your resume is a good thing to have available and to share when you're pursuing jobs. But I found for people at all different parts of their careers, early, late, transitioning, that usually you're going to find, like you said, on LinkedIn, you'll find good opportunities through talking to people that you know who know people and using your network and that sort of thing. So it seems pretty rare nowadays that the #1 leader for somebody to get an at-bat with an interview is just, sending out their resume with a cover letter or something like that. So with that being said, I see the resume as sort of a follow-on to, somebody who works at a company that you're interested in and they told HR about you and now they've asked you for your resume. So you're following up and saying, well, you know who I am by name and you know that I'm interested in working with you. Here is a document that kind of describes my qualifications for the role that I've approached you about.
Right. And let's just back up a minute because you mentioned there is something really key. You said you were implying that blasting resumes is not the best way to get a job. And that I agree with that. So what would you say is the best strategic way? A lot of people obviously say relationships, like meeting people at meetups and then utilizing those relationships. Is that a good strategy?
I think it's the best strategy. It's certainly, almost anybody in your group of listeners, right? All of them are pursuing something new probably, but they're not doing that alone most of the time. They're involved in online communities. They're taking classes in person at a brick and mortar code school, or they're going through tutorials on the web. And so they can reach out to people that they've met through those networks on Twitter or through email, or the people who are running the code school and say, do you know some local companies that might be hiring, and that sort of thing. And so I think you were correct when you said, blasting your resume out all over the place. It just doesn't seem to be very effective anymore. And getting, intros to people, looking for people who have a second connection on LinkedIn to a company that you're interested in, that sort of thing, I think is the best way to try and find opportunities, at least from the start.
That's great advice. And that sounds right in my experience as well. But the biggest question that I get is in this area is how do I reach out and approach a company or somebody that works at a company completely cold. So you say it's a second degree connection on LinkedIn. They don't perhaps know you, but they know the person through which you're connected. Do you reach out to them and just say, hey, here's my portfolio. I'm really interested in working for the company that you work for. Is that sort of the strategy that you give?
Yeah, I would say if you feel that you are interested in a company and you don't have any direct connections there, the first thing you can do is go to most companies' websites and look for their job listings. I think that's a little bit different than sort of just blasting your resume out everywhere, because you're actually approaching the company and saying, hey, you've expressed a need to fill a position of this type, and I'm interested in that position. And so usually that's a good way to kind of get intros. It's not the best way because a lot of jobs never make it to the job boards. But if you are interested, I think the first thing you could do is just check out the jobs page or the careers page for the company that you're interested in, see what they're offering, and just reach out through whatever means they recommend reaching out through. For LinkedIn, I usually look for, people who know people I know. And so, let's say I know Janet, and Janet knows Tim, who works at a company that I'm interested in. I might send a LinkedIn message to Janet and say, hey, Janet, I see that you know Tim. He works at Acme Corp. Would you mind making an intro if you're in touch with him? Because I'd like to talk to him about a job that I've been looking at Acme Corp, and I'd like to hear what he has to say about that opportunity.
So you're requesting the intro before making the intro yourself.
I think that's much better. Cold, especially on LinkedIn, I think people are pretty weary of random in messages they get. It's just kind of hard to break through the noise. A lot of people are getting hit with messages from all angles and recruiters and different people. And so if you happen to know somebody who knows somebody, then asking for that intro can be a great way to actually get a personal intro that'll usually be more warm, and it might lead to a better conversation.
And now, so guys listening, this is one of your immediate action items here. If you don't have your LinkedIn profile set up, please set that up. That was the most game-changing thing that I did for my career in this industry. The reason I got a job at the White House was specifically because they found me on LinkedIn. So if you don't have that profile set up, guys, you have to set it up right now. Josh, do you have any tips on things that they need to make sure they do when they set up that profile? Obviously, list their experience, put their portfolio projects, even their personal projects.
Absolutely. I think you just hit the two big ones, is making sure that you list your current experience. And this applies to resumes too. Make sure that, if you send a message to somebody on LinkedIn and ask for an intro to somebody else that's at a company that you're interested in, make sure that when that somebody else is told, hey, Josh is interested in a job at your company, they're going to go to Josh's profile. They're going to go to my profile on LinkedIn. Make sure that what they see is something that seems like a good fit for the thing that you're pursuing. And this, again, should be reflected in your resume too. So make sure that, it's not some, if you're transitioning careers, you need to update your profile so that it says, I'm into web development, or I'm writing code, or whatever the new thing is that you're doing. So make sure that when that person goes to look at your LinkedIn profile and says, okay, well, Josh is interested in an opportunity at my company. Who is Josh? That who they see when they see Josh on LinkedIn, they see somebody who has some sort of experience that comes to bear at the company and the opportunity that you're looking for. So this can be a little bit challenging if you're casting into different industries, but at least make sure that your profile is current, it's updated, and that it lists things that are relevant to the kinds of jobs that you're pursuing right now.
That's great. And a couple of other tips for you guys on LinkedIn. Spend the $100 and get a nice headshot done. I need to take this advice myself, but it's really beneficial to spend the $100, get a professional photographer in your area to just take your headshot outside somewhere. That helps a lot, really conveys professionalism. Also in the description, so LinkedIn, you can have the description section where you'll actually type some stuff. Make sure you put keywords in that description. So at the very bottom, what I do is I list all my skills. So there's a separate section on LinkedIn to list your skills, but I also replicate those skills in the description because somehow the keywords in the description turn better search results for you. So that's a tip. Another tip is to definitely put your personal projects on LinkedIn. So your probably first question to me hearing this episode is, hey, I don't have any experience. How do I utilize LinkedIn if I don't have any experience? It's not that black and white, guys. Put your own personal projects up there. So make stuff, deploy it, put it in production, then put it on there. I mean, that's all that matters. So if you do that, I think you can utilize Josh's strategy here to reach out to is that what it was, Josh? Second degree connections?
Right. So you'll look for, see if you can find people who are second degree connections, which means that you and they have someone in common. And then you'll reach out to the person that you have in common and ask for an intro to that second degree connection.
So that's a great strategy. Now, another question you guys might have hearing this is, how do I grow my LinkedIn? Like, when you start, you're not going to have any connections. So if you're looking for ways to build your LinkedIn network, the best way is to import your address book, import your Facebook, and import your Twitter. And then on LinkedIn on the right side, you'll see suggested connections. It might take them a while to process your new friends that you've just added, but go back the next day and you should see suggested connections. Josh just mentioned, and I've also mentioned that I love that feature and use that feature a lot. So that is a great way to utilize, because LinkedIn doesn't like you to add people that you don't know or haven't worked with unless they suggest that person to you. And then you can just one click add them as a friend. Okay, so moving on from LinkedIn, now you have a great LinkedIn profile. Maybe you've reached out to a second degree connection. You've got them to reach out to you. Maybe you've said, hey, I want to work at your company. They've put in a good word for you, and you're about to get that first phone call. Some people dread this call, some people love it. It's obviously the easiest part of the interview process, and it's commonly referred to as the phone screen or the screening call. Now, Josh, this is obviously a big topic, but how would you approach sort of giving somebody advice in this area for the first phone call?
I think for the first phone call, like you said, it's a screening call, right? And so I think you can be pretty relaxed and understand that the whole purpose of the call is to make sure that it's not really even to make sure you're a good fit, it's to make sure that you're not a bad fit. And so, you just want to make sure that you're mostly honest. There's one exception if salary comes up and you're asked what your current or desired salary, I recommend not sharing that. And I think we'll talk about that more later. But otherwise, just be honest about what you're looking for. Those are the kind of questions that you'll get asked, right? What are you looking for? What's your experience? What is it that made you interested in this role? In general, can you tell me what you're bringing to the role? And I think you just should try and be as relaxed as possible and just be as honest as possible, because usually that call, you're not necessarily 100% trying to get to the next step, because it's possible you're not a good fit. And so you just want to be honest so that you can find that out early, so that you don't spend a lot of time pursuing an opportunity that isn't going to work out.
That's good advice. Also, though, would you say that it's important to research the company beforehand? Because typically on those phone screens, they ask, why are you interested in working for this company?
Absolutely. I think there's a much higher level sort of interview prep that you should be doing. And preparation is key to interviews. So you want to make sure that when you go into that call, and also your early interviews, that you've done research on the company so that you know who you're talking to. So that's a really important point that you made, Dane, that you want to spend some time on the company website, Google them and see what's being said and written about them in the media and on blogs and that sort of thing. See if you can learn about the company itself, so that when you're asked a question like, why do you want to work here, you can give an answer that points to something that means value to the company that you're talking to, as opposed to something that is meaningful to you. So your answer should be focused on, how do I add value to the company? How can I be appealing to them as a candidate? And you can do that really well if you're prepared and you've done your research and you know about the company that you're talking to.
So one last piece of advice for the phone screening that I would give is to try to be a little bit of a unique individual in the phone screen. So when they ask you, why is it that you want to work here? Try to come up with something that's more than just, oh, I like the industry, or, oh, I like your company because of something I saw online. Have some kind of, if you can have some kind of unique standout statement, like, my goal is to do X and your company aligns with that goal in Y way. That type of thing isn't necessary at this very early phone screen stage, but anything that you can do to stand out, usually they'll message it on, they'll be like, oh, this guy's a good one when they send your name down the line to the next interview. So guys, if you don't know what this is like behind the scenes, it's very much an assembly line. So each of these interviews, there's probably 4 or 5 different interviews, maybe 2 or 3 that we'll discuss here: the phone screen, the technical interview, and then other character interviews. And those are very much like an assembly line. They're just going to see if you pass and make the cut, and then they're going to move you on down. And if you don't, you'll just get simply dropped out. And that's the way this works. So you want to make sure that each one you do your necessary preparation and put sufficient importance on each stage of the interview. Even though this is just a phone screen, I see a lot of people blow this off. And they get the call, they get the questions on the call, and they're like, I don't know. That's not acceptable, guys. You have to be prepared even for the simplest, smallest parts of this interview process. So moving on. So after they do the phone screen, Josh, what would you say is the next most important thing to focus on? Obviously, there's the dreaded technical interview. And then there's also the in-person interviews where they might ask you the more personal type questions. What would be your strategy here for how to approach that?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. The technical interview will usually come a little bit earlier, so we'll talk about that first. I think the best thing that you can do for technical interviews is try to learn everything you can about the setup and the environment and the type of interview that it will be. I think some people are sort of intimidated by it, and they're not as forward about asking questions that could get them useful information to help them prepare. So if you can figure out, ask the recruiter or the hiring manager, whoever is kind of shepherding you through the process, what's the format of the technical interview? What technologies are we going to be using? So that you can prepare for that specific type of technical interview. It can be pretty jarring as a candidate if you show up to a technical interview and you're completely blind as to what's going to happen, right? It may turn out to be a collaborative online interview. It could be a whiteboard interview where you're writing code, and you may not even know what language they're going to ask you to write code in. So make sure that you know what technology are you using, what's the format, so that you can think about it and kind of get your mind into a place where you're ready to interact in that way, because it's pressure that you're going to be under. So the more you can do to prepare, the less you'll feel that pressure.
And those tips Josh just gave are really great. Make sure that you're prepared. Always ask at the end of the phone screen what format. I think, Josh, that was the best thing I've heard in a long time, because people so often forget, and then they walk into the interview and they're like, oh, this is a whiteboard interview. Shoot. And sometimes they prepare for a whiteboard interview and they sit down in front of the computer, and it really can throw off your game. One thing that I've been told throughout my career is that you have to prepare for whiteboard interviews by writing code on a whiteboard. Or on paper. So if you're very unfamiliar, guys, with writing code on paper, sometimes they'll even ask you to write pseudocode, because that's sort of an abstraction above that. Pseudocode just shows you that you know how to think in the way that they want you to think. So I would review pseudocode. I would review writing on a whiteboard. Perhaps buy a whiteboard. I have like a $50 one in my office. It's not that expensive. Go ahead and spend the money and buy it if you're approaching these interviews, because writing code on a whiteboard is very different. It's very different, very weird, very strange. Also, another tip, people typically start at the top left of the whiteboard when they start, because that's where their cursor is in a code editor. Do not do that. Start in the dead center of the whiteboard with your code, because you're going to do it wrong and you're going to have to move things around, and you're going to want to put things before them. And that's one of the best tips that I was ever given when I did my first whiteboard interview, was to start in the middle. And by doing that, actually, it helped me organize my thoughts. And when I had questions for them, they could come up and write above my code and make comments and suggestions. So that's another tip here. Josh, is there anything else about technical interviews that you want to discuss before we move on to the more in-person interviews?
I do have some sort of a short but fun story to tell about preparing. There's somebody I worked with about 3 months ago, and he had a technical interview coming up. And the night before, he realized he should prepare, because he was talking to me. And I said, make sure that you're prepared for this interview. Find out everything you can about it before you go in, so you can knock it out of the park, because he's a very, very good programmer. And so he looked into it, and I think he reached out to the hiring manager he was working with and said, hey, tell me about this technical interview I'm doing tomorrow morning. And they said, oh, well, you're going to be writing Python, and we'll give you a laptop and you're going to have to write Python. And of course he said, well, I haven't written Python in 2 years or 3 years. So he went and actually got to the interview location, the office park, like half an hour early, and took his laptop with him. And when he got there, he just parked, opened up his laptop, Googled Python technical interview, found a couple of example questions that are asked, pretty simple little things that you build in Python, hammered them out in the parking lot, and then he went into the technical interview. And one of the questions that they asked him was extremely similar to one he had just practiced. And so he was, he knocked it out of the park, and he prepared for literally half an hour. But he wouldn't have been ready at all if he hadn't thought to ask, because he hadn't written Python in so long, and they weren't a Python shop. But for some reason they like to ask Python questions in technical interviews. So prepare, find out what you can about the opportunity, and prepare for it.
That's an excellent story. And guys, if you listen to that story and your takeaway was that he got lucky because there's an infinite amount of things that he could have looked up and that they could have asked, keep in mind that luck favors the prepared. So he was lucky because he spent the effort to prepare. Do not discount stuff like that and don't prepare because of that. I see that a lot. That's a bias, and your brain will want to trick you into that. He spent that 30 minutes, and he could have gotten unlucky and done a different thing, but it doesn't matter because he took the effort and he prepared. He was going to be a little bit more ready than the other candidates. So that's key. Cool, Josh. Thanks for that story. So moving on from the technical interview, what would you say is the next type of interview? How do you characterize the next type of interview if they're successful in the technical one? Because there's a bunch of different types, right? They could do a virtual Skype interview if it's remote, or I guess they could bring you in person to meet the different executives in the company. How do you usually characterize that to your students?
Yeah, it varies by company, like you just said. So some companies like on-site interviews. Some of them will do all Skype or Google Hangouts interviews. Some of them will do all phone interviews. But the nice thing about those interviews is, with a few exceptions, there's a little bit of a difference between each one, right? Like a phone call is a little bit different than a Skype call. With video is a little bit different than, sitting in an office or a conference room. But the format is usually very similar. So once you get through the technical interview part, it's usually more of a fit interview. Where they're trying to understand, how will you fit the culture of the company? What kind of employee will you be? Will you work well with the team that you're going to be on? And so the questions that you get in the interviews past the technical interview usually fall into 5 or 6 buckets that are very common. And so you can actually prepare for these types of questions, and that plus a little bit of a framework that I've created can help you pretty much prepare for all the possible questions that you'll be asked once you get past the technical interview.
Perfect. Can you just run through what those 5 types are?
Absolutely. So there are 6, but I'm pulling one out because we already talked about it. That's the technical interview. So the 5 remaining are, I'll go through each one and I'll name it the type of question, and then I'll give just kind of a quick little summary of how to prepare for that question. The first type is just resume questions. So a lot of times, this is kind of a crutch that hiring managers use, and I definitely am guilty of it. But often when we're talking to a candidate as a hiring manager, we may not actually know anything about that candidate, except that maybe they were screened, maybe they did a technical interview and did pretty well, and now they're in my office or I'm talking to them on Skype. And so the beginning of the interview is often just the interviewer, the hiring manager, kind of pulling up the resume because it's the easiest thing to go to and scanning the resume for things to ask about. And so the first thing that you need to do is make sure that your resume is current, kind of like we talked about with your LinkedIn profile earlier. Make sure that it's current and that everything on your resume is something that you're happy to answer questions about or talk about. And so if you're listing experience that they say to you, oh, I see you have experience with this, would you like to do that here? And your answer would be, no, I'm not interested in doing that here. Maybe that experience shouldn't be on there unless you have to have it because your resume is so thin. Same thing with technology and tools and things like that. So if you're not interested in using a particular coding language that you've listed on your resume, then you should probably take it off, because if they ask you, oh, hey, I see that you write here that you are proficient in Java. Would you be interested in doing Java with our company? And you say, oh, no, I haven't done that in years. The first thing they're going to think about is, okay, well, if he has Java listed here and he doesn't want to do Java and it's been years, what else on this resume can't I trust? So you want to make sure that your resume is up to date, it's current, and that it reflects your actual needs and wants in terms of jobs right now. So that's the first one. And then there are personal questions, which are, they run the gamut, but these are the questions about your personal life. What are your hobbies? What do you like to do when you're not at work? And things like that. This is just an opportunity to sort of relax and give honest answers. Most of these questions, when hiring managers are asking them, are usually designed just to kind of interact with you and get a feel for what it's like to talk to you and work with you. Because again, they're considering, do I want to bring this person onto a team with me and work with them every day? And so the personal questions are really more just, what's it like to talk to you and interact with you 8 hours a day?
This is the classic, could I have a beer with you after work question, or series of questions.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is.
So guys, make sure that you are honest in this section. And, a lot of the times I see people that, might not have a ton of hobbies. And in these types of personal sections of these interviews, they feel stressed or pressured that they perhaps don't have a lot to talk about. But actually you do. Everybody has a lot of interests and things to talk about. I find that if you prepare for this and you actually make a list, so, like Josh keeps mentioning, prepare for every single one of these sections. Even though these sections are all part of usually one interview or one in-person interview, prepare for each section. So have a list on a note card that you take with you or something of like just different talking points. That can be helpful. Because a lot of the times in these interviews, you're going to pull the whole deer in the headlights and forget your whole life And that's very common. I mean, it's easy to forget everything when you're on the spot, even though it sounds ridiculous beforehand.
I totally agree. Preparation is really important, even for stuff like that. You know yourself as what's your personal life, but maybe you're so familiar with what you like to do in your hobbies that you don't think about it very much. So you might actually blank when you're asked, what do you like to do? You've never had to think about what do I like to do? You just do those things.
Cool. So moving on from the personal, what is the next section?
The next one is technical, but we already covered that, so I'm going to jump over it. And then there's tools and technology, which is sort of related to resume, but I think it's also important to prepare for this one in terms of, what is the company that you're interviewing with doing? So if you're trying to write code, what's their technology stack? If you want to be a front-end developer, what technologies do they like to use? Are they using, vanilla JavaScript, or are they using Angular or something like that? So just preparing for talking about the tools and technology that you're comfortable with. And again, making a list. It's probably on your resume, but if it's not, just kind of familiarize yourself with the things that you're proficient in and that you would like to work with, and the things that the company might be interested in having you come on and work with them using those tools.
Yeah, totally. And another thing is have a list of technologies perhaps on your resume that you would love to work with. So instead of writing, here's a list of technologies I know. So a lot of the times I see this where people will list technologies that they don't know so that they can get a job to work with those technologies because they think they will love them. That's fine, and I understand the mindset there, but on the resume, I would actually go a little bit further and instead break it out and say, here are the technologies I've been doing for a couple of years and I might not be that excited about. Here are the technologies I'm really excited and passionate about moving forward for the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think that's great. I actually saw, I did a salary negotiation workshop in Orlando a couple of months ago, and one of the attendees there showed me, he was a web designer, so of course his resume was something he designed online. And he had a really cool thing that he did, which was sort of like a progress bar, but for different technologies on his resume. And so he had, let's say, Perl, and the progress bar was at maybe 10%. And he didn't have it labeled with percentages, but, and then he had, maybe Ruby, and it was at 100%, like the bar was totally full. And I thought that was a really cool way to kind of indicate your level of proficiency with the technology. And you could do something similar with interests. So I know everybody's not going to design a resume like that, but I thought it was a great way to communicate, not only technologies that I have experience with, but to actually show visually and very easily, these are the ones that I'm most comfortable, most proficient with. These are the ones that I'm a little bit less proficient with, but that I've dabbled with in the past.
That sounds great. So moving on from tools and technology, what is the next section that they'll get into?
So there are two more, and I'm going to lump them together because I think it's best if you try to make them work together. And the two other areas that you are often going to be asked about are special projects that you've done. These can be side projects or even class projects or group projects, or old projects that you did maybe at a previous company you worked at. And then also challenging situations that you've experienced either professionally or in your education, and how you worked through them. And so the reason I say these work well together is I think it helps the interviewer to kind of track with you better if you can find a single story that illustrates one of each of those. And so I encourage people to try and think through, what's a special project that I did or a group project that I worked on, and what was a challenging situation that I had in that project. And thinking about why you're asked this question is really important. So why would a company want to know about special projects you've worked on? Well, because certainly early on in your tenure at a company, every project you do is probably going to feel like a special project to you and to the company because you're going to be trying to learn how they operate. And so kind of describing your role in that project and what you did and what you learned and how you function can be a good way for the hiring manager to kind of hear, again, what it would be like to work with you 8 hours a day. And then the challenging situation is a way for you to illustrate not only that you are capable of identifying difficult things, which some people have a hard time sort of identifying, weaknesses and that kind of thing, but then how you work through it can illustrate what's your teamwork dynamic? And so that's why I like to lump it with a group project or a special project and say, well, here's a special project I did. Here was my role on that project. Here's what we accomplished. Here are the great things that came out of it and what I learned. And here's a challenging situation that we encountered. And this is what I did to help overcome that challenging situation to get a positive result. And I think lumping those together and trying to find a single story to tell there can be really helpful, help the interviewer track with you, and also give you an opportunity to get to know the interviewer a little bit.
Perfect. That's great advice. Now, when it comes to the challenging situations question that most people are asked at the end of the interviews, and guys, if you don't know what I'm talking about, typically this question goes like, So what are the hardest problems that you've worked on? What are the things that have challenged you the most? Any question like that is what we're talking about. Josh, how would you suggest that people prepare for that? Do you suggest that they actually analyze before this interview all of their challenging situations and extract maybe the most impressive one? Or what sort of way would you handle that?
That's an interesting question. I think that you should definitely prepare for it, and you should think of at least one or two challenging situations. I think the key is twofold. One is just to be comfortable talking about the situation, and so it can feel very uncomfortable if you are caught off guard by this question, because there's a lot kind of going on in asking someone to tell me about a challenging situation that you were involved in. So I think just preparing for it and having a couple, even just one, in mind that you've thought through recently and you're familiar with the story so you can retell it is very beneficial. Also, back to what we talked about earlier in terms of, I think you said this very well, identifying, goals that the company has and then attributes that you have that can help the company achieve those goals. You can do that with the challenging situation. So because you did your research and prepared about the company, what their goals are, what they're trying to achieve in terms of business objectives and maybe their mission statement. And so, taking that challenging situation, refamiliarizing yourself with it, and then making sure that you can also kind of turn it in a way and spin it in a way that will resonate with the hiring manager that you're talking to, because you're saying, well, this is a challenging situation that might look like something that you've dealt with in your day-to-day job, and here's how I overcame that situation. And so you're able to demonstrate that you can add value to the company while telling a story totally unrelated to the company.
Yeah, that's the best advice I've heard in years, probably. Guys, pay attention to that advice again. Let's just restate that advice. This will make the difference between you and another candidate, I guarantee you. If they ask you what is a challenging situation that you've overcome, and you describe to them, because you've done research and prepared, a challenging situation that the current company has and how you've overcome it in the past, you're solidifying in their mind their reason for hiring you. That's literally what you're doing. That is probably one of the best, most high leverage ways to answer that question that I could possibly imagine. And just let me give you an example of how I did that in the past. So when I took my first management position in a programming or web development career, I was specifically asked how I handle dealing with requests from a lot of people, right? So that's a common thing in companies when they're hiring their first manager. There's a bunch of different departments that have requests. And I knew that coming in, and what I did was, before they even asked that question, when they asked me what challenging situations I had overcome, because I knew what stage of company they were, what types of challenges they had, because I knew somebody else at the company, etc., I was able to say that my biggest challenge was dealing with being a freelancer, running a digital creative agency, and managing deliverables and requests from a broad spectrum of people. And I specifically identified an example of that to them, and they basically in their minds solidified that, okay, this person has overcome exactly what we were about to ask them if they could help with. Okay, well, we really need that. So boom, top of the list. If it doesn't guarantee you the job, it at least puts you in the top 5%. There's no way that it can't. Unless you fail in all of these other areas, you have to be A+ in all of these areas that Josh has been talking about: the resume, personal, technical, the tools and technology, the special projects, and the challenging situations question. But it all comes down to that last question and how you answer it. Okay, thanks guys for listening to this episode. I hope you had a good one. And again, today we spoke with Josh Duty, who is an expert negotiator and will help you in your career advancement as a web developer, as a Ruby on Rails developer, as a front-end developer. Josh, where can people find you online?
Thanks for having me today, Dane. It's been a whole lot of fun. You can find me, the easiest place to get in touch with me almost real time is on Twitter. I'm at Josh Doody, JoshDoody on Twitter. You can also find a lot of the stuff that I write is at joshdoody.com. You mentioned earlier, you can find my book and a lot of other salary negotiation and interviewing materials at fearlessSalaryNegotiation.com. And for Start Here FM listeners, I've actually got a special offer set up, and that's at fearlessSalaryNegotiation.com/Start Here FM. And what you can get is a guide on how to ace your next interview, along with 3 email templates you can use at different points in the interview process when you need to follow up with a hiring manager or with a recruiter. And so that is a really good summary of all the stuff that you and I talked about that had to do with interviewing and preparing and how to answer questions and all that good stuff is all in that guide. So that's at fearlesssalarynegotiation.com/startherefm, and you can get that stuff for free.
Awesome, Josh. And again, guys, go check out his ebook. It's on Amazon, Fearless Salary Negotiation. Go sign up for his email list at fearlesssalarynegotiation.com, and he will send you emails that will help you throughout this process. And that day, when that day comes where you're thinking, oh, you know what, I need a promotion, I want you to think the name Josh Duty, and I want you to find one of his emails, hit reply on it, and send him a question. And he will reply. He's a good guy, and he's got great value to give you. Thanks, guys. See you next week.